Yeah, and according to the National Center of AfCFTA, Nigeria is to begin the formal export of locally produced commodities to South Africa, Rwanda, Cameroon, and Kenya from this month under the Guided Trade Initiative of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Well, let's get a sense of how this is going to play out. Joining us now is Wofai Samuel, Acting Director General, Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, joining me right here in the studio. Great to have you.
Thank you very much, Ladi. I'm very honored and pleased to be here.
Fantastic. It's great having you. And it's been a long time coming. You know, we've been wondering when Nigeria will start to take advantage, of this AfCFTA trade bloc. So from starting to refine our oil, at this time, we're now looking at joining and actually making use of the AfCFTA. How are you seeing this at this time?
I mean, like you have mentioned, it's a dream come true. It's long overdue. It's a good thing that not just Nigeria, but several countries in Africa, more than 50 countries in Africa, are looking at maximizing the impacts and gains for AfCFTA. You have also said that Nigeria needs to diversify its economy, move from being an oil-producing country to more or less a commodities producing country, focus on agriculture, focus on mining, other sectors, power generation, power itself, away from oil and the process of oil and gas, because indeed no country in the world who have become first world or who have become global economies, who have become so industrialized, have focused mainly on oil. They're focused on several other sectors. But now looking at AfCFTA, how ready is Nigeria? Because in the past we had complained critically about AGOA. We had complained that we did not maximize the benefits of AGOA, or we are not maximizing the benefits of AGOA as much as we're supposed to. AGOA comes to an end in 2025, and there's a clamor. A lot of entities, a lot of institutions, persons are clamoring for the U.S. government to extend the life of AGOA beyond 2025. So for AfCFTA has fully kicked off, and a lot of other African countries are keen into it. It's an opportunity for Nigeria to key into it. But now for Nigeria to key into the benefits of AfCFTA, some factors have to be put in place, from the strengthening of our infrastructure sector. When you talk about infrastructure sector, you're talking about roads, you're talking about railways, you're talking about the ports, you're talking about the energy facilities, to name a few of that, away from strengthening our infrastructural sector to policy coordination. A lot of times, so many countries, so many governments across the continent have complained so much about policy somersaults. So you have a government who is in power for like 4 years, and immediately after 4 years, another government is coming with an entirely new policy framework. So there has to be a bit of that policy coordination. What are the neighboring countries doing? Let's say Togo, Benin Republic, Ghana. How can we possibly what's the word now? How can we possibly intensify our cross-border trading? How can we possibly simplify the processes that are involved in our cross-border trading, amongst others? Monitoring and evaluation also has to be put in place. So who is our representative from Nigeria at the AfCFTA? Who are the persons representing the country from the Ministry of Trade, to name a few? How is the monitoring and evaluation process being coordinated? So all of this and more are some of the factors that Nigeria and several other African countries should consider putting in place,
because
before,
as it stands, these issues have not been addressed.
I do not think, to the best of my knowledge, I do not think for Nigeria specifically these issues have been addressed. To a reasonable extent, I still feel so many African countries are scrambling and struggling to understand the context of AfCFTA. So AfCFTA is very simple. I mean, free liberalization, meaning you're exporting your goods and services across the continent on almost zero tariff. Whereas, as we speak right now, if you're transporting goods from Nigeria to Benin Republic, Nigeria to Togo, you understand the clumsiness, you understand how cumbersome it could be around the borders, across the borders. So with AfCFTA, a lot of these border rules and laws are minimized to the barest minimum. A lot of these rules are minimized, and then for tariff, you're paying little or nothing as long as your goods measure up exportable standards. And then we talk about intra-African trade. So many African countries, that's one of the problems we have. We trade more globally. So we trade more with other countries. I'm a huge advocate for the US because I work for the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce. But away from the US markets, we trade more with European markets, Asian markets. We do a lot with China. Why can't we trade in between? Why can't we trade within ourselves?
Because we've heard that conversation a lot, that argument that Africa should try and trade with Africa, at this time. But looking at the issues you also mentioned at this time, we've seen most of the major African economies struggling with their currency at this time. That's against the dollar. We've seen the situation in Nigeria right now, even though we're seeing the Naira kicking off the second quarter quite strong. But we see, the Egyptian pound that has been devalued. South Africa, they're also having their issues, with currencies at this time. So talk to me about how AfCFTA plays into this currency issue. Do we still have to trade with the US dollar?
I mean, that's a subject matter that has been reviewed tremendously by the AfCFTA Secretariat, and they're still talking about it. At this moment, I can categorically say that Africa, or let me say West Africa, for instance, we don't have a common denominator. So we don't have a single trading currency, just like, America has the dollars, the US has the pounds, euros. For Africa, we don't have that. And it's been a long time coming. We've been having these conversations on how Africa can possibly trade with a single currency. But the realistic response to your question is that at the moment, in the meantime, that is not feasible. We've not even started the conversation on how we can possibly maximize the gains of AfCFTA. Talk more of talking about how we can possibly trade with one currency. So for me, I would say, as a trade expert, as an advocate for seamless trade, advocate for intra-African trade, it's okay to trade with the dollar. It's okay to trade with the CFA, the Cameroon, French-speaking countries, as long as the processes are seamless, as long as you're able to conduct these transactions digitally. So, for instance, I'll give you a typical example. You're traveling to a nearby country like Benin Republic, and they are refusing your naira. A typical example. If I'm traveling to Benin Republic and in country they're accepting naira, I don't think I have a lot of challenges, in as much as we're not using a single currency. You begin to have challenges when you're traveling to Ghana and you're presenting naira and nobody's accepting naira. So if you're accepting naira and there's a means of exchange of naira everywhere in Ghana, it would never really be a problem. So the reason why we keep talking about, we need a single trading currency, is because when you travel to other countries across the continent, it's difficult for you to exchange the currency your country uses easily in that country. If the currency exchange mechanism was seamless to a reasonable extent, I don't think there will be as much complaints about the dollar.
And we have these countries, this economy is also having to deal with dollar inflows, at this time. So I guess it's time, or in the near future, we should be looking at that currency seriously.
Definitely we should.
Like the echo, that's been shelved for a while now. That's
been shelved for a while. Definitely we should. But at the end of the day, you also need to understand that it takes a lot of policy coordination. It takes a lot of willpower. It takes a lot of, what's the word now, decisiveness to put all of these things in place. So the latest has been the AfCFTA, across Africa, we're talking about how can we possibly maximize the gains of AfCFTA so we can trade with each other a lot more. If we trade with each other a lot more, automatically it rubs off on our currencies. So goods and commodity services you're supposed to be getting from China or from other countries, you're getting them from other nearby countries. It rubs off on your currency because you're exchanging local currencies, not necessarily international currencies. And then I'd also like to say that for us to achieve this, there are so many stumbling blocks like barriers that are impeding our progress. Language barrier is also one of it. So West Africa is a typical example. There are so many countries surrounded by Nigeria and West Africa, but move from Nigeria to Benin Republic and you don't understand what they're speaking. So for language barriers, how do we break through language barriers? Recently, I was in Rwanda, sponsored by the USAID. And in Rwanda, there were several countries who were there to discuss some policy issues concerning youths in Africa. There were several other participants from various countries. And we had like the translators. It made our coordination, it made our networking very seamless. So when we're looking at language barriers, what are the processes, what are the steps we can put in place to address issues like language barriers?
I believe we have some apps that are, stepping up.
Are we maximizing the gains? Are we maximizing the use and effectiveness of these apps enough? So these are some of the conversations we should be having. So for AfCFTA to be very effective, language barrier is something we also need to consider. And like you mentioned, with technology, it has made communication more seamless. There are several apps, legal translation documents that you can easily employ to ensure that you're communicating seamlessly and effectively with people from other regions and, across other countries.
Speaking about, barriers at this time, we're seeing, most African countries also deal with sky-high inflation. Even right here in Nigeria, we're on an all-time high. Food inflation also at an all-time high right now. How much of a barrier is rising inflation to the AfCFTA bloc? Okay, so when you talk about inflation, inflation is a global phenomenon. So whether you're looking at the Americas, you're looking at Europe or Asia, it's a given and common topic. You almost cannot avoid inflation. But at the end of the day, the question is how severe and how intensely hit is your economy by inflation. Every economy can never be the same. I give you a typical example in Africa, for instance. So we have like least developed
economies in Africa, least developed countries in Africa, and then we have developing countries in Africa and developed countries in Africa. I don't know if you understand the categorization. So there's like category A, B, and C. So the countries in category C would be facing worse level of inflation comparable to countries in category B, comparable to countries in category A. Just like Nigeria right now is facing inflation, the US too is facing inflation. Countries across Europe, yes, but at the end of the day, the severity in Nigeria is a lot more comparable to what you have in the US, because the US, countries in Europe are more advanced economies. So when people talk about inflation on AfCFTA, there are solutions in the sense that for countries that are severely hit, what are the possible solutions? What are the possible options you have to play down on the inflation that your country is saddled with? Number one, manufacturing. The more you manufacture, the more you're able to export. The more you export, the more you gain foreign currency into your market. The more you gain foreign currency into your market, the more jobs you create. So entrepreneurship and innovation is one of the factors and one of the critical characterizations that could play down on inflation. So away from being very export dependent, we need to be away from being very import dependent, we need to be export dependent. So let's grow our agriculture sector, let's grow our manufacturing sector. If we work on our power and electricity, we're going to get more entrepreneurs.
I'm talking about electricity. I don't know what band you belong to, but we know the almighty band A just got a massive tariff hike, and definitely that's going to play into the manufacturing story. How bad do you think it's going to be?
Well, at this point in time, I mean, analysts have come up with various opinions. It could go south and it could go in a good way. It could go left or right. So now, when you look at raising the tariff for electricity, two things. When you raise the tariff, we're getting more electricity. True or false? That's correct. We're getting more electricity, so of course better productivity, but at the end of the day, are Nigerians able to afford the tariff? Are they able to afford the funds and the fee to finance these electricity charges? Because like you did mention, our economy is I think the majority of Nigeria's economy is informal. Very critical. I'm not sure I have the exact percentage. Very small fraction of Nigeria's economy is formal. So Nigeria's economy is driven more by SMEs, MSMEs. Now the SMEs, if they fall within the band, are they able to afford the cost of production for manufacturing? But either way, in my personal opinion, I would say, yes, indeed, increase the tariff and give us constant and sufficient power supply. Because when there's power, people are more productive. When there's power, people manufacture more. Our goods will not go to waste. Our goods will be able to be stored. We are not expecting to incur more losses. And at the end of the day, if you say, okay, let's maintain the lower bandwidth, and then we're paying little or nothing for electricity, we spend a lot of money buying diesel, generating our own power. By the time you compare the amount of money you spend generating your own power, it's as much as paying for your tariff to get electricity. But at the end of the day, the government has to be very straightforward. You have to put the cards on the table. It's not like you're getting a lot of monies from the masses and then you're not giving us a commensurate, ample supply of electricity. As long as we can measure what we're getting side by side what we're paying, then I think we're on a good track. Yes.
Thank you so much. It was great having your perspective. Wofai Samuel, Acting Director General, Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ladi. Thank you.
All right, we'll take a break now. We're definitely going to find out what's going on in the market, talking about the local growth and also global markets that we track. That's in a moment. Just stay with us.